Good afternoon. Happy New Year. Welcome to the January monthly policy update. Ben Kershaw with Independent Sector. People are coming into the virtual conference hall right now. I'll just give people a moment to gather. While we do that, let me welcome you. If you're joining us for the first time on an independent sector webinar, we're a national membership organization representing a diverse set of nonprofits, foundations, and corporate giving programs working to ensure all people living in the United States thrive. This is a webinar, so your lines are muted. Please do submit questions into the Q&A function. Really at your convenience. We'll pause from time to time, but please fire away on those when you like. We welcome comments and general banter in the chat. This webinar is generally a membership benefit for independent sector members. If you're not an IS member, please don't hang up. You're welcome to hang out with us for the day. And if you want to talk to our membership folks, we would be happy to introduce you. Before we start, I want to respectfully acknowledge I'm joining you today from Washington, D.C. And Washington, D.C. is the ancestral home of the Piscataway people. They're still in the area. They're working to reclaim their land and their traditional practices. D.C. is also, many of the buildings we inhabit here were built by enslaved people. Wherever you are joining us from today, we're really glad you're here. I'm joined by Wes Coulomb and Heather Mead, our trusted partners at Washington Council Ernst & Young. As I turn it over to Wes and Heather to give us an overview of a lot of different debates that are happening on Capitol Hill today, I will remind us all that January 25th marks 75 years since Grand Rapids, Michigan became the first city in America to put fluoride in their water, a big public health day. And even more momentous in my household, we're 63 years to the day since the release of 101 Dalmatians. So a lot of important anniversaries today on January 25th. Wes and Heather, the opposite of Cruella de Vil, what can you tell us about what's going on up on Capitol Hill today?
Well, it's hard to top those announcements and those anniversaries, Ben, that you put out there, but we'll see what we can do on that. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll kick it off, and then Heather can add some additional thoughts. Let me just kind of start kind of laying the table, set the table for what Congress is doing right now. Obviously, they've kicked off the new session of the year in Congress. They're back basically dealing with unfinished business from last Congress, namely the appropriations process, where they've already had to kick the can down the road one more time from January to March. And they recently passed an continuing resolution to extend the appropriations deadline from January to March 1st for 4 appropriation bills, and then March 1st for 4 appropriation bills, and March 8th for the remaining 8 appropriation bills they haven't completed from last fiscal year. So that's kind of the next deadline they're faced with right now. They did reach an agreement between Speaker Johnson and the White House on a top line number for the appropriation bills, basically going back to what they agreed to last summer in the debt limit negotiation bill in June. That's going to kind of set the top line numbers, but they still need to then figure out the individual 12 appropriation bills numbers to figure out how to process each of those individual bills. Looking at the calendar, between now and March 1st, the Senate's out 2 weeks in March. The Senate is only in part of the month of February, and looks like they're going to not really have a lot of time between now and March 1st to figure out how to pass those individual appropriation bills. So the view is they're going to try to negotiate something, but the view is they're probably not going to be able to have appropriation bills done by March 1st or to meet that additional deadline. So what does that mean? We're also operating under a threat of sequester, in the sense that part of the debt limit deal last June also imposed a 1% across the board sequester for appropriation bills that were not done by January 1st. So that kicks in January 1st, but does not actually become real until April 30th of this year. So they really have some time to figure out and negotiate the package before these sequester across the board cuts kick in on April 30th. So Still not a real, forcing deadline until then, but they still need to figure out how to get the appropriation bills done for this year at some point. There is different options. They could do a big omnibus appropriations bill, which they're trying to avoid. Certain House Republicans are trying to avoid a big, massive appropriations spending bill like they do in past years. They want to do them one by one. They haven't been able to pass the bills one by one, and so kind of gearing towards that as a possibility. There also is talk of maybe just doing a full year CR, just kind of extend the numbers to the entire fiscal year till September, and kind of punt on the bigger policy issues as part of the appropriations process. So, we're still in January, but we'll see how that process kind of unfolds on the appropriations process this next several weeks into March. They're also trying to reach an agreement on a supplemental appropriations bill to provide additional funding for Ukraine and Israel. That is kind of held up with demands by Republicans to negotiate some border provisions as part of that package. They're kind of working on a bipartisan negotiation in the Senate, which is about 80% there, but not quite done yet. And it's also facing some hurdles with some of the conservatives on the right, and we'll see how that kind of plays out. But that's kind of also pending as another issue they want to deal with. They're trying to work through behind the scenes on a negotiated bipartisan package. We've also seen on the tax front, the House Ways and Means Committee last week report out a $75 billion tax bill to basically deal with three business provisions that were impacting businesses on R&D expensing, as well as investment depreciation for investment assets and interest expense deductibility. As part of that, they would expand the child tax credit to make the credit itself more refundable to larger families as part of some negotiated agreement between the Democrats and Republicans on that package in the House Ways and Means Committee. That deal was negotiated between Chairman Smith in the House and Chairman Wyden in the Senate, and got 40 votes to pass out of the Ways and Means Committee. And we expect negotiations to continue and try to pass that bill on the House floor eventually next week through suspension of the rules on the House floor. If that does, the bill will then go to the Senate, where the Senate is likely to kind of address the bill. We're talking about some senators wanting to make some changes to it. They modify the package, but I think it kind of depends on how the vote proceeds and how the vote is in the House. If it's very bipartisan, a strong vote, maybe the Senate's more inclined to push it through quickly when they get the bill passed over to them from the House. So we're obviously watching that and how that might play out as well. Heather, let me kind of pause there. As Heather, she has any additional comments or insights of things that we are looking at, anything I might have missed.
Yeah, I think those are definitely the right things to hit with. I think a few things that I would add, right, for this group in particular. You mentioned sort of the efforts to add things to this package, and I think that's really important right now. One of the things that is really driving efforts around the appropriations package, and then also looking at these other bills that you mentioned, is that sequester that is looming over their head that they messaged. This will affect all of the domestic spending, right? It's not sort of a one for one, or my program is doing good and your program is not. It is an across the board sequester of 1%. And so that will affect all of our programs where there is federal funding involved. One thing that I do want to mention is that the way it is structured, it does also hit military spending in a way that would be difficult for some of those programs as well. So there are a lot of proponents on the right and the left that do feel strongly about getting something done in that time frame. This really puts a lot of pressure on that March timeframe, though, to get something done before they hit that April deadline. And there are a few other things that are kind of coalescing around that time frame. The other one is the State of the Union. So we'll see President Biden head up to the Hill on March 7th for his State of the Union. This is broadly expected to echo a lot of the themes that we'll hear from him in the presidential election, focused on a lot of the economy, and they've been out pretty strong, focused on women's health lately with some other anniversaries. So all of those things will start to play in. We also have a number of deadlines in the primary. January, also falling in March around that time frame. So there'll be a big focus on presidential politics at the same time that we're trying to work through these very policy-driven appropriation deadlines. And so there's kind of a confluence of activity that is driving the outcome in some of these pieces. So it'll be a complex dance for Congress to work their way through all of those pieces over the next few months.
Thank you both. Yeah, certainly the calendar is no friend to serious, thoughtful policy discussions, if that's how you want to characterize what's going on up there right now. So I want to open things up to questions. As we do that, one question for Wes and Heather. You mentioned the State of the Union. Thanks for flagging that. The other thing that often happens early in the year is the release of the president's budget proposal. Do we think that the president's budget will be out before the State of the Union, or do we think it'll be after the State of the Union?
I'm pretty sure it'll be out after the State of the Union. Usually it's required to be out by the first Tuesday or Monday of February. That's often missed, and certainly there's no penalty for missing that deadline. It's been missed several times before, including President Biden's budget been released late last year, if I recall. So I think that if I was, pretty confident they're going to release it after the State of the Union, mainly because you haven't finished the appropriations process from last year. And so part of the next year appropriation need to build on what they've agreed to in the previous year, and it's kind of hard to make all the numbers work without knowing what the numbers are going to be for this year. So I think that they would not put it out before the State of the Union, but not till after. So it could, we obviously got to wait till the appropriations process plays out and see how that resolves itself. But I would expect it to come out, potentially not till later in March, or could even be as late as April.
Yeah, in 2022, when we didn't see, fiscal funding resolved until March, that was another example very similar to this situation. And we also saw the president's budget come out late that year as well. So historically, I think that's accurate, Wes.
The punishment with blistering press releases about president neglecting his duties, I'm sure will be swift, and I'm sure that'll really hurt Joe Biden's feelings.
Recover from the paper cuts.
Right. Yeah. But it doesn't mean, Ben, that you won't see, press releases or leaks or announcements by the administration on various initiatives they want to put in the budget, right? So I would think that leading up to March 7th, and then also afterwards, we'll see a steady, release from the administration of various policy proposals that they're going to put in the budget, and also things they want to campaign on for 2024.
Make sure I'm leaving room for people who want to drop questions in the Q&A. And so I have one more question, for you two, and it's about the tax deal and the prospects moving forward. Right, so many of us are quite unhappy, disappointed not to see a non-itemizer charitable deduction in there. Many legislators are also unhappy about that. We've seen some supportive press releases particularly from some Senate champions on that issue. And, the Senate Republican lead on tax policy is one of the people that hasn't endorsed this bill yet. So, how can you give us a little bit more, detail or, guesses at least about how Senate changes to the bill could happen? Wes, I know you mentioned the possibility of a big bipartisan vote being maybe putting the clamps on things, but can you give us a little bit more detail about maybe how that might play out? What some people should be hoping for?
Yeah, I think already. So as I mentioned, the deal was announced by the Republican chairman in the House and the Democrat chairman in the Senate. Did not get endorsed by the ranking members on either the House or Senate. Although ranking member Neal did vote for the bill out of the committee, so he's now on record supporting the package. So that kind of leaves ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee, Crapo, Republican, not endorsing the package. He's indicated that he'd like to see some changes to the bill as it goes through the process. So I would expect they would push for the Senate Finance Committee to have a markup of the bill when it does come over from the House before they process it through on the Senate floor, where that would be an opportunity for them to offer amendments, make changes to the bill before they vote it out of committee and to the Senate floor. The other issue with tax legislation on the Senate is, a difficult body to move legislation through unless it's by unanimous consent or broad bipartisan support, because only even one senator can hold up the process and delay action. So it takes a full week, to process legislation if there's going to be some issues or objections. And so moving a tax bill on the Senate floor also, invites amendments to the bill and from anybody who wants to offer amendments. And so it's difficult to move legislation to the Senate floor very quickly, especially a tax bill that has lots of people wanting to add things to it as it goes through the process. So that really means they need to kind of, I think, move it through on a bipartisan basis in committee, try to move it to the floor. And then the question is, can they move it on the Senate floor? Or do they try to attach it to some larger vehicle later on in the year, an appropriations bill, a CR, or something else that's moving on a must-pass basis? And that's kind of thing that they're kind of thinking through, is how get this done, what the process is. But I think there's a good chance that the Senate Finance Committee wants to have their mark on it. Senator Crapo has indicated he wants to make some changes to it. And so if it goes to the Senate, I think there will be opportunity for them to do that and either change it in the Finance Committee or on the Senate floor. And
We're
one
still
thing
alive.
yeah, one thing, Ben, just so you know, is that obviously, as you mentioned, the charitable deduction, right? The traditional extenders from years past that expired were not part of this package. It has some business provisions in the child tax credit. And what happened is a lot of those traditional extenders got included in the IRA last year because most of them were energy provisions. And so you have the unemployment credit, the UCD, other things that were out there that are left off the table. People in the Senate want to add to the package. And so the hope for us is that if we get an opportunity to amend the bill, there will be an opportunity to push and get the the charitable deduction added to the package as it goes through the process.
I have updates on a few other issues. We'll pause one more time for questions. But speaking of charitable giving, we should note that third quarter fundraising effectiveness project numbers have been released recently. And unfortunately, they continue the concerning trend that many of us have seen in various charitable giving data. So donors decreased moderately in this report, and donor retention rates continued to slide. I think of particular note for advocates on the Charitable Act, donors who are considered micro donors, people donating less than $100, showed the largest decrease through the third quarter of last year. Again, this is an environment in which those donors largely had no incentive through the tax code to donate, like they did in 2020 and 2021. Also, recently, nonprofit organizations, more than 40 of them, filed comments to the Treasury Department and the IRS on Form 8881, which you will all know is the form that small employers use to claim tax credits for establishing retirement plans and other retirement plan credits. The reason for this comment is that nonprofits don't get to file that form. They're not eligible for that tax credit. And the organization signing this comment made the case that isn't fair and ought to be corrected. And furthermore, noted that the form itself, because the comment opportunity was about the form itself, the form itself could easily be updated to include nonprofits and to allow nonprofit retirement plans to benefit from these credits with some simple formatting updates. So the holdup is not on the form side; it is on policymakers to address some of that inequity. Third, we want to remind you that the Treasury Department and the IRS have released long-delayed proposed regulations, guidance on donor advised funds, and they have extended the deadline to comment on those to February 15th. So these regulations include the definition of donor advised fund, including potentially quite broad definitions of some of these. The regulations also propose an anti-abuse rule trying to deter donors from using DAFs to avoid excess taxes. So we hope folks will take a close look at that issue and use the extra time that was provided. The last update that I have for you is a reminder that Foundations on the Hill is coming up at the end of February. You can register today. We will feature the event starts on the 25th, featuring a full day of programming on the 26th and the opportunity to participate in congressional visits on the 27th and 28th. Lots of really valuable policy briefings to be presented, in addition to an opportunity to stand with the philanthropic sector and make a difference on Capitol Hill. That event's presented by our friends at the United Philanthropy Forum in partnership with Independent Sector and the Council on Foundations. We'll make sure you have the info there to register in the links, but check it out. We hope to see you there. So now I want to pause one more time for questions about the appropriations process, about the tax deal, about the national security deal, or about any of the issues that I've noted here today. I can't help myself. I have one more question for Wes and Heather, and it's about earmarks. Right, there are a lot of potential community project funding requests that are included in legislation that, as we noted, hasn't made much progress on Capitol Hill. Certainly, I think if we get a year-long continuing resolution, those earmarks probably never come into being. So let me know if that's not true. And also, is there a scenario in which they reach a deal and trade away the earmarks in general in order to help placate conservatives or something along those lines? Should advocates be keeping an eye out for that as well?
Yeah, good question. So what's going on in the appropriations process, I think, is less about the community projects and earmarks and more about the top line number and about the policy writers, which are outside of the community projects, right? Legislating on appropriations bills, things having to do with abortion funding, things having to do with, other border funding, things like that they, policy writers, they want to add to the appropriations bills. But mostly, it's driven mostly by the House Republicans' desire to insert some of their policy ideas on the appropriations process. And I think there's bipartisan support for maintaining the earmarks or community projects in the appropriations bills. As you point out, if they did do kind of a clean year-long CR, then those things would fall out. And that's probably a last resort in this scenario. I think the hope is that they could pass the bills individually or in a series of minibus packages or one large package. I think they're trying to avoid doing a large appropriations bills, but I would think that they could maybe at some point, pass a series of smaller packaged appropriations bills that have several appropriations bills, into one package and move it through. And in that scenario, I think there would be retention of the community projects earmarks in there, because I think it's a bipartisan supported process. Both Republicans and Democrats have engaged in it on the Senate and House side. I think there is support for doing those and retaining those in the final bill, but it's kind of subject to the overall process and how that plays out. So Heather, have anything to add or comments and thoughts on that?
Thank you. We appreciate that. A lot of folks are interested in those community projects for good reason. Glad to hear that funding for this bridge in my district is not what's holding up the broader congressional appropriations process.
Yeah, because they have to kind of maintain the top line numbers, right? So they basically have to keep those within the overall numbers, and that's really kind of been mostly settled between Speaker Johnson and the Democrats. And so once they kind of figure out individual numbers, they can kind of work within that framework. The other things to kind of think about, things they want to do on the horizon is the FAA reauthorization bill is extended through March, and then obviously the big issue of the farm bill. extended through September of this year. And so that's also kind of on the plate of things to do to get done for this calendar year. But as you know, doing legislating in the summertime and closer to the fall, as we closer to the campaign, it's very, very difficult. So I think the hope is try to get everything done, this spring, early summer, and clear the decks. Because once they get into the July, August timeframe, they'll be out for the conventions and the Republican Democrats, and they'll be out campaigning. And Congress is even in session at all in the month of October, and only a short time in September. So the view is most things that get done will get done hopefully in this early spring, summer timeframe. Heather, any comments?
Yeah, Wes, I was just going to add to your list of must-do items. There are a number of expiring healthcare provisions. For example, all of the funding for our community health centers is expiring. These are very bipartisan. Program to help low-income hospitals is expiring, and so they've been extending those with the CR packages so far, but they're going to run into the end of the year where they have some additional items that are expiring, like the ability to allow telehealth without having to see an in-person provider in the Medicare program. There's some big things like that that are also expiring that'll hopefully create a little heat. So whatever doesn't happen in this springtime might have an opportunity to be addressed in this year-end lame duck period.
We had some questions come in, and this is what y'all get for providing additional insights. People's fingers are warming up. So a question about the tax deal, in particular, we know that most of the offsets in that legislation revolve around changes to the employee retention tax credit. So right, there are changes around some accountability, some increased penalties for promoters, some increased sort of awareness measures, and then an earlier cutoff date, moving up, kind of what the final deadline by more than a year in some cases. Can you talk about that January 31st cutoff date, specifically in light of kind of continued negotiations?
Yeah. So the IRS has been, in the last several months, aggressively pushing back on the number of claims that have been filed on the employee retention tax credit that, was put into law in 2020 as part of the CARES Act to the COVID relief, and then expanded in 2021. And so you have kind of 2 years, 2020 and 2021, be able to take the employee retention tax credit based on whether you shut down or not, whether you had your gross receipts reduced because of the pandemic. Those claims are not due until April 15th, 2024, the 2020 tax year, and April 15th, 2025, the 2021 tax year, just the 3 quarters that were allowed for 2021. The last quarter was clawed back, as you know, in the infrastructure bill. The bill that passed out of the House Ways and Means Committee would basically offset the entire cost of the bill, $78 billion, by mostly capping or cutting off the ability to file claims under the employee retention tax credit as of January 31st, 2024. So basically next week, we're going to get your claims in for both 2020 and 2021. So in some cases, a few months earlier, and in 2020 case, a full year earlier. And that's been driven by the IRS out there saying there's lots of fraud. It's costing more than they thought it was going to cost. And so just cut off the program. Obviously, as you know, just cutting off the program does not address whether it's fraudulent or not. And so it's going to impact both legitimate claims and those claims that may be fraudulent as well. So everyone's getting kind of cut off by January 31st of 2024 to file a claim. Otherwise, you can't get an ERTC as a small business or a nonprofit organization that was impacted by the pandemic. The intent was to have that kind of give people some time, right? The bill came out, a week or so ago. But now looking at the timing here, it's going to, if it does pass the House next week, certainly the Senate's not going to take it up next week. And so that January 31st date is going to kind of come and go without the bill actually becoming law. So it's looking like it could be a retroactive tax increase if they don't pass the bill by January 31st. And people would be stuck, not be able to file their claim. So there could be an effort in the Senate potentially to modify that date. Part of the issue here is that raises $78 billion to pay for the package. If you change the date out, it's going to reduce the revenue raised from that provision, and will impact the overall score of the bill. And so, people are looking at that and how to process that, but that's kind of what's in the bill and kind of what they're trying to do to cut off claims by January 31st because of what the IRS has been saying about the high cost of the program.
Sounds like if you are sitting on those applications, get them in. Thank you for the question. Heather, Wes, thank you both very much for your insights and your time today. Most of all, thank you to all of you for the work you do day in and day out. We're really glad to be back in the thick of it with you in this new year. Certainly lots to be done, and we'll do it together. Thanks again.
Great. Thank you.